June 14th, 1944. Camp Hearn, Texas. Water hissed through overhead pipes as 50 German women stood barefoot on cold concrete, trembling in silence. Stripped to their underclothes, they had been herded into a windowless room with floor drains and ceiling nozzles. One woman gripped her neighbor's arm so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Another whispered a prayer in German, her voice shaking. They had been told what happened to prisoners in enemy camps. They had been warned about showers that weren't really showers. When the pipes groaned to life, several women screamed. Others began sobbing. But instead of poison gas, clear water sprayed down. Warm, clean, ordinary. And in that moment, standing under the spray with bars of soap in their trembling hands, they realized everything the Reich had told them about America was a lie. Before we continue, if you're finding this story as powerful as we do, please hit that like button and subscribe to support our channel. We're amazed every day by this community spanning continents and time zones. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, whether Berlin, Buenos Aires, or Birmingham. It's incredible to share these forgotten stories with people all over the world. Now back to Texas, 1944. The train had rattled across southern plains for 3 days, windows coated in dust and heat. Inside, German women sat shoulder to shoulder, faces hollow from exhaustion and fear. They were nurses, clerks, radio operators, and auxiliaries captured in North Africa, Italy, and France. Most were in their 20s. None had expected to survive. Nazi propaganda officers had briefed them before deployment. If you are captured by the Americans, expect no mercy. They will torture you. They will humiliate you. They will kill you in ways designed to break your spirit before your body gives out. The women believed it. Why wouldn't they? It was all they had ever been taught. As the train slowed near the small Texas town of Hearn, population 4,000, a strange landscape appeared through dirty glass. Endless fields, cattle grazing under open sky, men in wide-brimmed hats leaning casually on fences, chewing tobacco. No barbed wire towers, no execution yards, just heat, dust, and unsettling calm. When the doors slid open, hot air rushed in, heavy with the scent of hay and mesquite. A young American sergeant, freckled and barely 25, stepped forward with a canteen. "Welcome to Texas," he said in slow English, offering water. His tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't even cold. It was polite. The women stared at him like he was speaking a different language, which in more ways than one he was. Camp Hearn stretched across flat Texas prairie, surrounded by barbed wire but orderly, almost suburban in layout. Rows of wooden barracks stood in neat lines. Beyond them, vegetable gardens, a mess hall, and even a small chapel. The American guards were farm boys from Oklahoma and Texas, most younger than the prisoners. At roll call, the camp commander, Captain William Harris, addressed them through a German-speaking translator. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will work, you will eat, you will rest. You are prisoners of war. But you are still human beings, and you will be treated with dignity." The word dignity hung in the air like something foreign. For years, these women had lived in a system where dignity was conditional, earned only through loyalty and obedience to the state. Here it was presented as a given. That first night, they were served dinner, white bread, vegetable soup, and real coffee. Some refused to eat, fearing poison. Others tasted cautiously, then devoured everything on their plates. One woman whispered to another, "If this is how they treat enemies, how do they treat their own?" It was a question that would haunt them for months. But the real breaking point came the next morning. The women were told they would receive medical checks and clean uniforms. First, they needed to shower. The moment the word was translated, panic rippled through the group. Showers. The room fell silent. An older nurse named Lotte turned pale. She had heard the rumors everyone had, about camps in the east, about rooms disguised as bathing facilities where prisoners were gassed by the hundreds. She had never believed it could happen to her. Until now. The guards led them to a concrete building at the edge of the compound. Inside, the air was damp and cold. Pipes ran along the ceiling. Drains dotted the floor. It looked exactly like the nightmare they had been taught to fear. A few women began to hyperventilate. One collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Another grabbed the translator by the sleeve and begged in broken English, "Please, please, no!" The American sergeant in charge looked confused. He glanced at the translator, Corporal Otto Meyer, a second-generation German-American from Pennsylvania. "What's wrong with them?" Meyer's face went pale. "Sir," he said quietly, "they think we're going to gas them." The sergeant froze. For a long moment he just stood there, staring at the women huddled by the door, shaking with terror. Then he took off his cap and ran a hand through his hair. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. He turned to Meyer. "Tell them it's just water! Tell them they're safe!" Meyer stepped forward and raised his voice, speaking in German. "It's only water. I promise you, just water and soap. You're not going to die here." But words weren't enough. Fear had taken root too deeply, so Meyer did something unexpected. He walked into the shower room, still fully dressed in his uniform, and turned on one of the faucets. Water poured over him, soaking through his shirt and trousers. He held up a bar of soap, white and plain, and rubbed it between his hands until it lathered. "See?" he called out. "It's safe, it's just a shower." Slowly, hesitantly, one woman stepped forward, then another. When the first jets of water hit them, several screamed. But within seconds, the screams turned to sobs, not from pain, but from relief. Lotte stood under the spray, clutching the bar of soap like it was holy. Her whole body shook. Another woman, Anna, a radio operator from Munich, sank to her knees on the wet concrete and wept openly. An American guard standing outside the door turned to his buddy and whispered, "What the hell just happened?" The other guard shook his head. "I don't know, man, but I think we just saved their lives without firing a shot." That night, Lotte wrote in her journal, a small notebook she had kept hidden since her capture. "When the water came, I cried. Not because it was cold, but because it was only water. I realized then that everything they told us, everything we believed about the cruelty of the Americans was a lie. They did not kill us, they gave us soap." Word spread quickly through the camp. The showers were safe, the food was real, the guards didn't beat them. Slowly, the women began to emerge from their shells. They started to look around, to notice things. The American soldiers joked with each other. They played baseball in the evenings. They sang along to music on the radio. They didn't march in lockstep or salute with rigid fury. They were relaxed, confident. And that confidence, the women realized, came not from fear or propaganda, but from abundance, from knowing they had enough. In the weeks that followed, the German women were assigned work details. Some sewed uniforms. Others worked in the camp gardens, tending rows of tomatoes, okra, and squash. A handful were sent to nearby ranches to help with livestock. One afternoon, a group of women was taken to a cattle ranch about 10 miles from the camp. When they arrived, they were greeted by cowboys in dusty jeans and sweat-stained hats. One of them, a young man named Luke, tipped his hat and grinned. "Y'all ever seen a horse up close?" The translator relayed his words. A few women nodded cautiously. Luke handed one of them, a clerk named Elise, the reins of a chestnut mare. "She won't bite unless you give her a reason," he said. Elise hesitated, then reached out and touched the horse's neck. The mare nuzzled her palm. Elise laughed, a sound so sudden and genuine it surprised even her. By midday, several of the women were brushing horses, feeding cattle, and learning how to mend fences. The cowboys treated them not as enemies, but as farmhands. When lunch came, they shared cornbread, beans, and bacon. The prisoners hesitated until Captain Harris gestured for them to sit. "Ain't no harm in breaking bread," he said. They ate together under the blazing Texas sun, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. That evening, on the truck ride back to camp, the women were quiet. Not from fear, but from something like wonder. Christmas 1944 came quietly to Camp Hearn. The war was still raging across Europe, but in Texas, snow dusted the mesquite trees, and the air smelled of pine and roasted meat. The American guards had pooled their rations to prepare a feast. turkey, mashed potatoes, gravy, and slices of apple pie. They decorated the mess hall with garlands and set up a small Christmas tree in the corner, its branches hung with paper stars and buttons. When the German women entered for lunch, they stopped in the doorway, speechless. Captain Harris stood at the front of the room, his hat tucked under his arm. "Ladies," he said through the translator, "today is Christmas. Wherever you are, that still means something. So no work today, just food, music, and a little peace." The women sat slowly, staring at the feast before them. Some bowed their heads in prayer, others simply wept. One of the cowboys produced a harmonica, another pulled out a fiddle. Before long, the room filled with music. First, the Americans played Jingle Bells, then one of the women began to hum Stille Nacht. Others joined in. By the second verse, the entire room was singing together, German and English voices blending in the warm glow of the mess hall. Lotte later wrote in her diary, "That night, I saw the enemy share their bread with us. I saw men who could have hated us choose instead to sing." I think that was the first time I truly believed the war could end. By the spring of 1945, the newspapers began to carry words like collapse and surrender. On May 8th, Germany officially capitulated. The war in Europe was over. At Camp Hearn, Captain Harris gathered the prisoners and made the announcement. "Ladies," he said quietly, "your country has surrendered. The war is done. You're safe now." The women stood in silence. Some cried, others simply stared at the ground. It wasn't joy they felt. It was the hollow confusion of having nowhere left to belong. That night, the camp was quiet. No one sang, no one celebrated. The women sat by the barracks watching the stars, wondering what home would look like now. In the following weeks, the Americans allowed them more freedom within the camp. Red Cross trucks brought extra supplies, soap, fresh clothes, and writing paper. The women wrote letters home, many for the first time since their capture. "Mother," one letter read, "do not fear for me. The Americans treat us better than our own leaders did. They are not monsters. They have souls." In late summer 1945, the orders came, repatriation. The women would be sent home. As they boarded the trucks bound for the coast, Captain Harris and a handful of guards stood by to see them off. One of the women handed him a small handkerchief embroidered with red thread. "For kindness," she said in halting English. Harris tucked it into his jacket pocket. "You'll be all right," he told her. When the trucks rolled away, dust trailing behind them, the camp felt emptier. Not because the prisoners were gone, but because something invisible had lingered there. Something forged through compassion in a place built for captivity. That night, Harris walked the silent grounds, the handkerchief still in his pocket. He looked at the empty bunks, the gardens, the horses grazing in the distance. "Guess mercy really does win wars," he murmured to himself. When the women arrived back in Germany, the contrast was unbearable. Cities lay in ruins. Families searched for the missing among the rubble. No one wanted to hear about kindness from the enemy. When the women tried to describe their time in Texas, the food, the Christmas songs, the dignity, people turned away in disbelief. Helga, the former teacher, wrote in her journal, "We returned to a country still at war with itself. They think we were brainwashed by luxury, but if dignity is a crime, then I am guilty." In the years that followed, the former prisoners struggled to rebuild their lives. Some became teachers or nurses. Others married and raised children. But none of them ever forgot Texas. Lotte kept the bar of soap from her first shower wrapped in paper on a shelf in her home. Anna kept the Coca-Cola bottle she had drunk from, a relic not of victory or defeat, but of awakening. And Captain Harris, back on his ranch in Texas, kept the embroidered handkerchief in a drawer. When reporters asked him years later if he ever regretted being lenient with enemy prisoners, he shook his head. "We didn't beat them with hate," he said. "We beat them by showing what decency looks like." In 1957, a small reunion took place in Hamburg. A group of women who had been held at Camp Hearn met again for the first time in over a decade. They brought photographs of the barracks, the horses, the Christmas tree. Someone began to hum Stille Nacht, others joined in. By the second verse, the room was filled with quiet tears. There was laughter too, the kind that trembles on the edge of memory. They spoke of the Texas guards who had shared their rations when shipments ran thin, of the townspeople who had looked at them not as enemies, but as people displaced by history. They remembered the smell of coffee brewing in the camp kitchens, the scratchy wool blankets that somehow grew softer with time, and the endless expanse of sky above the wire. I had never seen a sky so big, one woman said. It made me feel small, but safe somehow, as if the world was wider than the war. They had arrived in America as prisoners, frightened and defiant, expecting only hardship. Yet in that unlikely corner of Texas, they found something far more enduring: the small mercies of ordinary decency. One recalled how a local family had left warm bread at the edge of the field where she worked. Another, how a camp guard had shown her a photograph of his newborn daughter and said, "You'll see yours again." Those gestures, she said, did not win the war, but they healed something in me that the war had broken. As the evening wore on, they passed around faded letters and yellowed photographs, mementos rescued from drawers and attic boxes. One photograph showed a group of women standing beside a Christmas tree fashioned from branches gathered near the fence line, decorated with bits of tin and colored paper. Another captured a moment in the camp garden, rows of vegetables planted in the dry Texas soil, watered by hand, tended like fragile hopes. They laughed at how they'd fought over which seeds to plant, how the guards had teased them for singing while they worked. It was absurd, one said, to be prisoners and still argue about tomatoes. Outside, the streets of Hamburg were damp with autumn rain, the city rebuilt but still bearing scars. Inside, the women spoke in low voices about what came after the camp, the long journeys home, the ruined towns, the families gone or changed beyond recognition. One woman said she had spent her first year back in Germany afraid to speak at all, because every word felt foreign on her tongue. Another said she dreamed of the camp often, but always in color, not in gray. Texas, she said, was the only place during the war where I ever saw colors. By midnight, the room had grown quieter. The historian who had been invited to record their memories closed his notebook, realizing that the story they told could never truly be written. It wasn't a story of sides or victories, but of survival, of people who found against every expectation that compassion could exist in captivity. One of the women, before leaving, pressed a small paper star into his hand. It was made from the wrapping of an old ration tin, folded during a Christmas in the camp. "We had nothing," she said, "so we made stars." When the reunion ended, they lingered at the door, promising to write, to remember. A few did, most did not. Yet for one evening they reclaimed what war had tried to steal, their humanity. No statues, no headlines, just memory. A Texas sunrise, a shared meal, and the knowledge that kindness, even in captivity, endures. Because mercy too is a weapon, one that never runs out of ammunition. Thank you for witnessing this powerful story of humanity in the darkest hour. If this moved you, please subscribe for more forgotten narratives from WY2. See you in the next episode.